So moving on to video number 2, and I'm talking about camouflaging in autism spectrum conditions and focusing mainly on compensation. I will touch a little bit on the more basic masking as well. So as I was saying in my previous video, masking is done by both autistics and non-autistics alike. It's quite a universal thing, it's just autistics do it more. And more intensively, and it's more training. Compensation, the research they've argued, or founding a research, that it is more unique to autism. So non-autistics don't compensate, simply because they don't have anything to compensate for. Social skills come naturally to them if you're non-autistic. You're born with the right stuff in your head. Even no matter how introverted you are, if you're non-autistic, you're going to have a basic social understanding. If you're autistic and you have a sort of good verbal intelligence, at least, you can, in order to try and cover up your difficulties, you might try and compensate for them. So compensation is distinctively and is unique. It's not just autistics who do it, obviously, other conditions compensate as well. People with specific learning difficulties compensate. But the compensation I'm talking about here, the social type of compensation, is unique to autism. So there's two types of compensation. As I say, they do kind of exist along a spectrum and along the same line as masking. They're just more complex. There's shallow compensation, which is a more basic level, and then we move on to the deeper compensation. So starting with shallow compensation. So shallow compensation might include things such as learning to laugh at a joke when others do. So say, for the sake of argument, you're with someone and they, or with a group of people maybe, and they all start laughing at a joke. You might, as an autistic, you might start laughing as well, just so that you don't look like you're the one out who's not laughing. I've done that before. I don't know why it's funny, I don't know what's funny, so I just kind of go, like that. I don't know why it's funny, I don't know why I'm laughing, because I don't understand the joke, but I don't want to look like the odd one out. It can feel really alienating because you don't know why you're doing it, you don't know what the joke is, everyone else is laughing, but you don't want to look the odd one out. So that's a form of very basic, shallow compensation. It's not too different from masking, but it's slightly more advanced maybe because you're kind of intellectually analysing a situation maybe a little bit more than say basic masking. Basic masking is more about suppressing behaviours and maybe smiling a bit more, or maybe trying to blend into the background by not talking too much or whatever in certain situations, whereas compensation is introducing, in a sense, new social behaviours. So it's a little bit more complex than masking, but but shallow compensation's still pretty simple. And so that's what I do most of all, shallow compensation. So that's one example, the joke, laughing at joke, but without understanding why you're laughing. A deep compensation, if you were to take it another level, deep compensation, apparently, from what I've read, is working out why the joke was funny. Now, I can't do that. I can try, and indeed I have tried before, but I can't really do it to the extent where it really helps me in a social situation, because it feels really forced and contrived, and I still don't really get it on that level. If I don't think something's funny, no amount of intellectual rigour is going to make me instinctively laugh. But apparently some autistics can do that, and that's deep compensation, so working out why the joke was funny. But it's a form of compensation, because although the end result is the same as a non-autistic person, so they will genuinely then find the joke funny, they've had to use an alternative part of their brain to get to that result. So they've had to kind of bypass the autistic part of the brain by recruiting other parts of the brain that non-autistics don't. Or non-autistics, it's like a simple, instinctive thing, whereas for an autistic, even if they're deep compensating, but it still obviously requires more cognitive resources than, say, for a non-autistic person. It says that shallow compensation, an analogy, is a bit like a blind person using a stick, avoiding obstacles, whereas deep compensation is a bit more like echolocation, and this is, the analogy here is for blind people who have actually formed a spatial representation, which means that they do then have sort of vision, but it's via a different route. So deep compensation is a bit like that, is using alternative brain networks to get to the same result. So they appear to be the same, but actually it's using different brain networks. Whereas in shallow compensation, we're not using any alternative brain networks. It's more down to kind of just brute intellect, but you haven't developed any real understanding of the situation, and that's where I would say the level I'm at, no more than shallow compensation, I would say. Shallow compensation is a lot more superficial, so things like making eye contact, I used to try and do that more when I was younger, because I really struggled with eye contact, and it was often picked up on when I was a child. People would say, like my parents would say, make sure to look Granny in the eye, you need to look her in the eye, so obviously, that's kind of drummed into you often enough. Eventually, you start to kind of try and do it because you've been told often enough. I really struggled with eye contact. It was picked up on at school, at primary school. Teachers noticed it. I didn't really make eye contact with teachers. It was kind of sometimes I did make eye contact. It wasn't consistent. I think it depended what setting I was in, but I certainly had problems with it, and it was certainly atypical. And I still struggle with eye contact. I can make it sometimes on my own terms, but I don't get any information from the eyes. I find the eyes very distracting. I only really look at someone's eyes, as I say, on my own terms if I want to basically I'll just look at their colour, because sometimes, I'll be thinking, what colour eyes do you have? But I can't really get any information from the eyes, and when I'm talking or trying to listen to someone, it can be very distracting. But obviously eye contact is something that we're drummed into from a very young age to do, so one form of shallow conversation might be to try and make eye contact, and indeed, although I still don't look people in the eyes that much, I do try and look in their general direction, although as I've got older and kind of, I guess, a bit more I just don't give a crap kind of mentality, I'm increasingly not doing that so much, because I'm starting to think, why? And if I've got a problem with it, I think before I knew I was autistic, I was really trying to fit in, so I tried to do that more, but it's just so hard work. Even looking at someone's facial direction can be hard work at times. I can do it. Also, I find it's a direction thing. If they're kind of standing not too close to me, it's a lot easier to look in a direction, and I could do it then a little bit. But if they're really close to me, it can be a lot harder. So it really does depend on the context, and it can be inconsistent, and it also depends how tired I am and all sorts of other factors. Sometimes I can look at someone more than at other times, and it depends on the person, and there are all sorts of different variables that can affect how often I can look at someone's direction. But yeah, shallow conversation might include trying to make eye contact. It can also include things like imitating others, inhibiting undesirable social behaviours, but it's very inflexible, meaning that you can't really apply it very well in new situations. So new situations, fast-paced situations, shallow conversation isn't really going to get you through that. And I find out for myself, shallow conversation works well when I'm with my support worker. When I'm, say, in structured, rule-bound situations, for example, when I was volunteering at HUK, I could just about do the shallow conversation to get me through while I was there. But when I'm in a group situation and it's really fluid and ambiguous and fast-paced, I just tend to shut down. I find it really difficult. I try my hardest to carry on masking, but there's so much information going on, I'm just like, oh God, what am I actually doing here? So shallow conversation could break down under stress. There will still be those persistent difficulties with social relationships, as it said in this article, that will not be resolved, and that's certainly very much a case for me. I still have really quite profound difficulties in social relationships. I know it can be hard for people to understand that when they see me chatting away to my support worker, but that's quite an artificial, rule-bound, structured setting, isn't it? It's completely different to trying to make friends and stuff, and I really still have literally no idea how they work. Deep compensation, as I mentioned earlier, is where the autistic person forms alternative routes to essentially a good theory of mind performance. I don't really understand theory of mind that much, but I think from what I've read, it's all about trying to understand other people's minds and things like that. I know I really struggle with that. I have, on an intellectual level, as I say, I can read about it and try and understand it on a very intellectual level. I would say I do have some very basic understanding, but it's so basic, it doesn't really help me to really, influence or to try and it doesn't really help in social situations. It's a very basic level of that understanding, I'd say, and I still really struggle with it. Like the Sally Ann test, I think is the one I mentioned, and when I first read about that, because I was trying to understand it, at first I didn't get it, and that was even as an adult, and I was like, okay, now I get it. Now I do get it because I've read about it, but I didn't get it the first time I'd read about it, and I know that when I was a child, I showed it to my mum, she was like, yeah, you definitely would have failed it as a child, because I had really bad comprehension, and I would have answered it quite literally. if you don't know what the Sally-Ann test is, just Google it. I won't go into it now, but it's one of the main tests they do on like children with autism and stuff like that. I think it's like to do with comprehension. I know I would have, well, yeah, as my mum said, I would have definitely failed it because like that was the sort of test that I really failed as a child when they used to do like comprehension exercises to me when I was a child, and I really had no idea. As an adult, obviously, you do learn these things, and like on an intellectual level, I do, you know, I'm not stupid. I do understand that, you know, the very basic premise